Ben Shapiro being dragged and smeared, surprise, surprise, by the Washington Post, who for some goddamn reason gave Talia Lavin something to write about. Why would you allow this person in the Washington Post? Let me just say, the Washington Post is already getting bad, and it's going from bad to worse. And I've called them out over and over again about fake news they've written. Two examples, excuse me. One of their writers wrote a fake story about Kim.com trying to hack Seth Rich's Gmail account. And I called them out on it, and like 6 months later, they quietly changed the article. Yeah, how about that, Washington Post? What do we have now? Well, following the tragedy that is the Notre Dame fire, Ben Shapiro made a point about how he just tweeted something very simply that it was, like a testament to Western civilization, and it was said. What did Talia Lavin write? Talia Lavin, as you may know, is the person who falsely... Why isn't this loading? She's the person who smeared a wounded veteran who had an army symbol on his elbow. She accused him of having a Nazi symbol. He started getting all sorts of, threats and harassment, all that stuff. She was my understanding is she was forced to resign, under pressure from the New Yorker, where she was a fact checker at the time. She went to go work for Media Matters for America. Okay. Media Matters is a partisan, attack dog, They basically target people, and, they have an article up that's getting a lot of attention where it's accusing Joe Rogan of talking to too many men. And it's like, dude, Joe Rogan is sitting in a room talking to people. What are you talking? It's ridiculous. So Media Matters, it just exists to launch campaigns, smear people, and attack people. So Ben Shapiro was rightly upset that this former Media Matters individual was now writing for the Washington Post. Well, I'm going to let you guys in on a secret. I have a subscription to all of the big newspapers for one reason. I use them and cite them. The Washington Post, admittedly, much, much less. But of the big papers, Washington Post, it's still important to have access to their content because they have a restriction and sometimes it blocks you and it's really annoying. And I'm using the Brave browser and it's got built-in ad blocker, so it can be really frustrating. But I figured, you know what? Even if I disagree with some of the stuff they've written, I'm still willing to, spend, I think it's like $2 a month to get access. Not this time. Not this time. No way. No. You take a fringe far-left conspiracy theorist and you platform them, and I'm out. I'm not saying they shouldn't do it. I'm just not going to give you money. I have never in my life given money to anyone like InfoWars, okay? The only reason I give money, it's to the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, is because they are big newspapers that often cover big stories. The Washington Post, admittedly, not my favorite, but I figured, hey, $2 a month? Seriously, it was like I think like $2.50 a month. And I'm like, okay, fine. I don't want to deal with the ad blocker. I'm consuming their content, albeit critically. The New York Times, I'm a little critical of, but I tend to trust them. And the Wall Street Journal, I tend to trust. But they do have their faults. The point is, when I saw that the Washington Post was taking a fringe far-left conspiracy theorist who writes fake news, I was like, no way. I'm not giving you money. You nuts? Not like I wanted, look, I didn't necessarily want to overtly support them in any way, but the way I felt was like, listen, if I'm going to take their articles, even to critique them, and I do it fairly often, and I read through the stuff, I'll give them the $2.50, right? It's easier for me. It's fair, as much as I'm not a big fan of the Washington Post. Now I'm just like, no way, dude. No. Talia Lavin wrote some nonsense about a guy because she didn't fact check on his elbow or whatever. She went to work for a nonprofit activist organization. Now they're giving her a position to teach at NYU about the far right, and she lies about Ben Shapiro. Look what she wrote. She said, shortly thereafter, fast-talking far-right pundit Ben Shapiro called Notre Dame a monument to Western civilization, which it is, and Judeo-Christian heritage. Literally is. It's like it's a cathedral. Given the already raging rumors about potential Muslim involvement, these tweets evoked the specter of a war between Islam and the West that is already part of numerous far-right narratives. Is that a joke? What are you talking about? Ben Shapiro, this is what, BuzzFeed did something similar. Paul Joseph Watson said, look at the people who are laughing about the cathedral burning. And he retweeted a video. And they accuse him of trying to push the Muslims cheering hoax. And it's like, well, hold on. Maybe, right? Maybe. What's the source of the video? Paul Joseph Watson tweeted out the source. Did Paul Joseph Watson say Muslims? He didn't. Okay. Will I say, because Paul tweeted out France 24 Arabic, and there were a lot of people with Arabic names cheering, but there were also a lot of European names cheering, and Paul didn't say Muslim. So while I personally would say something like, I think they may be trying to insinuate that, but it would seem that many people, are doing this. BuzzFeed's trying to make it seem like, they took a screenshot of what Paul was saying, and it's like, hold on, right? If there are people who are cheering, they're cheering, and Paul didn't say that about them. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to force a perception about what Ben Shapiro or Paul or what anyone else is saying. And of course, it is true. There are people who are going like, ooh, like trying to play like, who did it? Was it deliberate? It's like, we don't have any information. I don't know if we'll ever get any information. Right now, we're told it was an accident, but there was an investigation. My understanding is they had like 30 people detained. So, I shouldn't say detained, but apparently the investigation brought in 30 people for questioning. I think is a better way to frame it, because I don't know to what capacity. But apparently it was like workers or something. So I don't know. We'll find out what they're willing to tell us and what we find out. And listen, when people talk about this stuff, when it comes to fires, and they want to talk about conspiracies, I say, listen, I understand there was a string of cathedral fires, but there's a simple solution. Sometimes fires happen. And, I was talking to someone and they said, yeah, but at Notre Dame, they haven't had a fire there in hundreds of years. And I'm like, exactly. Like, you'd think a fire would happen eventually. It's not like there's never going to be fire. Fire can happen. And if you've got, I was talking to my dad about a fire at a mosque on a story a long time ago, and I asked him about it. How would you determine whether or not something was arson? And he just said, you know what, man, someone left the coffee maker on. Like, it's really that simple. It takes one little spark from an electrical short, a drill, there's things with electricity. Like a cell phone could trigger a fire, like it happens. It just really does. So simple solutions tend to be the correct one. Anyway, look what Media Matters said, which is probably it's been sitting on the screen the whole time. They responded with, fuck you and the burro you rode in on. What? So, but the fact that they used the word burro leads me to believe that somebody speaks Spanish, whoever wrote this. Ben said, hey, Washington Post, any interest in fixing this nonsense? I noted that Notre Dame is a monument to Western civilization because it is. That has nothing to do with blaming Muslims, and to suggest it does is simply a lie. And what they're doing here, what Talia Levin did, is she's playing this game of, without directly insinuating. So, given the already raging rumors, these tweets evoked the specter of war. Oh, she didn't say Ben Shapiro was accusing them. No, she's trying to push the narrative to make it seem like that in some way is a possible thing. Just because Talia Lavin lives in a psycho cult bubble where she believes far left conspiracy theories and she follows the fringe 10 people who believe nonsense, doesn't mean that Ben Shapiro has anything to do with them. And this is how they try to create links. So it's like what I mentioned about Paul Joseph Watson. What was it responsible to tweet? Okay, so if you take a video from a predominantly Arabic page and then film the video and say, look who's laughing, I would argue it's irresponsible to not provide the context. At the very least, I could say it was irresponsible of Paul Joseph Watson. But to insinuate that he was accusing Muslims of doing anything without him actually saying it is wrong. You're trying to interpret his motivations. So the response a lot of people said was like, we know what Paul's bread and butter is. It's like, yes, but you can't just say things without evidence. And the reason I say that is because they do it all the time when they say something like Trump, without evidence, claimed X. Okay, that's the rule. You can't just accuse someone of something unless there's evidence of it. Period. And so what they're trying to do here is, it's a very clever thing. There's a bunch of tricks they do in media. And look at, but more importantly, the response from Media Matters is like kind of the lead on the story. Not only are they trying to smear Ben Shapiro for something he had nothing to do with, they just tell him to go fuck himself afterwards. Like, wow, that's great. I don't understand why anyone in their right mind would ever take Media Matters seriously. But yes, these left-wing activist groups, for some reason, still command some kind of power that gets people deplatformed, debanked. It works for some people. The challenge is if you have a small platform, you're fucked. Okay? If you have a small following, the bank is going to go like this. I have no idea who this guy is. Just get rid of him. If you have a big platform like Ben Shapiro, who has one of the top podcasts in the world, then the bank's going to be like, no, he's an Orthodox Jewish guy. He's a conservative commentator. We're not going to go anywhere near that. Plus, the fallout could be much, much more damaging. So effectively what's happening is there's a bottleneck forming where if you can get past a certain level of notoriety, you can actually start speaking, more safely. You can present your ideas because they'll come after you, but you've got a big following to protect you. But if you're at that small point where your following's not big enough, maybe you've got 20,000 followers, 50,000 followers, that's pretty big, but not enough. So there was an article I saw about this dude who's accused of being a white supremacist. And you look at him, and he really does look like one of these, it's just like the tattoos, the hairstyle, the just everything about how he dressed himself. And you'd look at that photo and you'd be like, whoa, that dude, what is it? And I saw this story in Huffington Post, and I'm like, you know what, though? I know that Huffington Post is full of it, so I'm not going to believe it. And it turned out, I don't know exactly what the story was, but it's contested whether or not he's actually just a troll or something. But I was thinking about that and thinking about how they smear Count Dankula. They look at Dankula and they see this guy, and he's a white dude laughing, and he's got, tattoos, and then they put a big, thing on the newspaper that calls him a Nazi, and people don't go and investigate who he is. They just go oh, he's a Nazi, oh. And then you actually talk to Dankula, and you're like, oh, he's actually kind of moderate left. You know what I mean? There's a bunch of clever tricks the media likes to do to get away with these things. She never actually claimed Ben Shapiro was targeting Muslims. She just wrote a paragraph up to insinuate that he was evoking the specter of war between Islam and the West, which he wasn't. It's clearly an opinion piece. It was labeled as perspective, but this is how they do it. So I was making a joke the other day that you could say something like this: Ben Shapiro, who has been accused of being alt-right, once said blah blah blah. Or now, here's what the reason I'm saying that is, here's what they'll do. Someone else will write this: Ben Shapiro, who in the past has been accused of evoking the specter of war between Islam and the West. Bingo, there it is. Then the next article will say, people often remark how Ben Shapiro evoked the specter of war between. So they slowly erode what actually happened with fake news like this. Look at it this way. I could hire a homeless guy with no teeth off the street who's sitting there going I once saw Donald Trump kill a dog. And then I'll say, Donald Trump, who was once accused of murdering a helpless puppy, was seen today. Well, he was accused by a deranged homeless guy waving his arms in the air who wasn't wearing pants. But I don't need to tell you that part. What I'm saying is the truth. You see how they do it? That's how they do it. That's how they smear people. It's a funny game. It's a funny game. And unfortunately, what happens then is you're going to see a game of telephone from the Washington Post. Now someone from the Huffington Post or Vox is going to say, recently in a Washington Post article, citing the credibility of the Post, Ben Shapiro was accused of evoking war between Islam, blah, blah, blah. Then you're going to have BuzzFeed quoting Vox saying, it was recently reported by the Washington Post and Vox that Ben Shapiro was trying to trigger some kind of conflict between Islam and the West, and it's all technically true. 5 articles later, it pops up in Wikipedia, and it says, Ben Shapiro has been criticized heavily for often pitting the West against Islam or trying to claim that there was a war brewing between, all because he said the cathedral was a monument to the West, which it is. Literally, it's like, it was, you had people on TV, on cable news, saying that for Catholics, it feels like 9/11 seeing this happen. People aren't dying, so it's not in the sense of the tragedy of death, but it's this huge monument that was started construction at the end of the 1100s, and it was 100 and something years to complete, and it went through renovations, and it was fixed up over time because obviously, but I believe the foundation is the foundation. And simply by saying wow, this long-standing, cathedral, it's 900 years old, represents great accomplishments on the West. And it's okay, it does, right? And they take that and they turn it into Ben Shapiro hates this group or that group, or he's alt-right or whatever. And that's how the game of telephone is played by these fringe wackaloons. So I'll end by saying one thing. The Washington Post, you know what? By all means, have whoever you want write articles, okay? But that was a line for me. That was a serious line. Not I should, listen, I don't necessarily want to support the Washington Post because I know they've done bad things in the past. But simply because they've written sloppy articles like Covington and Seth Rich and about Veritas doesn't mean that everything they ever write is bad. So I'm willing to say if if they're a paper that's considered prominent, and they are, whether you like them or not, they're one of the biggest papers, I'm willing to cough up the $250 to bypass the paywall and use them to, like, in reference to conversations and things like that. I typically don't use them for direct sources on a lot of issues. If I do, it's to make a point. But this is a line, okay? I'm not going to give money to InfoWars. I don't care if you're a fan of InfoWars. Like, that's not for me. It's for you. Go ahead. I'm not going to give money to the Washington Post if they're going to platform someone who's basically, you know, Alex Jones for the left. Like, Talia she's off her rocker. She's literally a crazy person. She tweeted out the other day, like, when did 9/11 become sacred and to whom? Considered very offensive. She called Dan Crenshaw Captain Shithead. It's like, yeah, you are a hateful, weird, far-left conspiracy person who's now smearing Ben Shapiro in the Washington Post. That's a line for me. That's a line for me, right? So the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, look, they've done bad things in the past too, but it doesn't mean they're all bad, and it's still important to have access to culturally relevant newspapers. I am willing to forego whatever the Washington Post's cultural relevance may be if they're going to platform weirdo conspiracy theorists like this who have no expertise, who have lost 2 jobs, okay? The New Yorker, out. Media Matters, out. And now you're putting her at the, and then everyone gets, it's like, are you seriously going to give her a job at New York, NYU? That's insane. And then the Washington Post puts her up. These people are insane. Absolutely insane. There's no reason anymore. But you know what? At 4 o'clock, the video I'm planning on putting together is a challenge and a critique of the intellectual dark web, which this does fall into. But I'm like building up some, like, I'm doing research, so it's probably not going to be till 4, but stick around. I've got another video coming up at 1 p.m., and I will see you on this channel, and I will see you then.